We're excited to be back here at EduCare with Miss Megan O'Brien. Our live comments, if you're watching from home, our live comment section is open. So if you have questions, feel free to jot in your questions and I'll be happy to pass them on to our presenter. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Miss O'Brien.
I have a microphone.
You have a microphone.
Yep, I'm mic'd. So welcome. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the live streamers and anybody who goes back and looks at this on the archives later. My name is Megan O'Brien, as Rebecca said, and I'm a speech pathologist in the school district. I currently work at Head Start, and I've been in Long Beach School District since 1997. Most of my career has focused on preschool and early intervention. It's really where my heart is. So welcome. I myself have a 14-year-old son, and you'll hear about him throughout my presentation. While we're getting started, I just want you to turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself. Tell them the age of your children or child and maybe one thing you hope to learn or one thing that brought you here. Thanks, Rebecca. So would anybody like to share why they came today or something that they're hoping to learn? Would you like to share?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Why you came or what you're hoping to learn? It's okay if you don't know. Oh, you're just waiting for the mic.
And I actually don't know.
Okay.
So I wasn't sure. I was sharing. The topic just intrigued me, you know, and as I was telling her that my wife and I try to take whatever classes we can just to, I mean, any quiver we could put in our, you know, add to our armory helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So today we're talking about books and how language and books are related, how you can build your child's language and vocabulary skills through reading books. We're going to talk about early literacy skills like phonological awareness and rhyming and some activities that you can do at home. I just want to give you, first of all, the acknowledgement for being here. You are your child's first and best teacher. You spend the most amount of time, especially in these early childhood ages, you have the most influence over your children. More than a teacher or a coach, you really are building and developing your child's language skills and social skills and all of their areas of development with every interaction that you have. And what we know about the first 5 years is the brain is developing at a tremendous rapid pace. Within the first 5 years, the brain is making more than 1 million neural connections every second in the first few years of life. That means the connections that are happening within the brain. And so when you're exposing them to books, when you're reading to them, talking to them, playing with them, you're helping them build those strong connections. You're helping them build their school readiness skills. And we know that kids as young as 7 months old are already rehearsing language. So we want to help them to do that, and we're going to talk about how we do that with language in a minute. And we also know that a supportive language learning environment helps reduce the risk of learning disabilities later on in a child's life. So everything that you're doing really is promoting the development of your child. Oops, let me go back. Sorry. So we're going to talk about 5 areas of early literacy skills that you can develop from birth on. You can even read with your child when you are pregnant or when the baby's in the womb. And when the baby is born, the rhythm of the book will be familiar and can be soothing for your child. It's never too early or too late to start reading on a regular basis with your child. We're going to look at the foundations of learning to read and write, and those involve conversation and language skills, vocabulary, story comprehension, print knowledge, and sound awareness. So we're going to go through the definitions of each of these areas, and then we're going to look at a specific strategy that you'll go home with that you can apply to all areas of your interactions with your kids, and specifically book reading. When we look at conversation and language skills, that's defined as understanding and using language in a social context. Your child's ability to speak and understand language will help them to understand and use and think about what they read later on. When I turn my head, it gets very loud. I have to get used to the mic. So in the area of vocabulary, vocabulary is defined as how many words a child understands and uses. So there's both the understanding and the using, and those can be different. Children typically understand more words than they actually use. They have to understand it before they can speak it. We know that the size of a child's vocabulary entering kindergarten is predictive of their ability to learn to read. The more words you know, the easier it is to sound those words out. If you have a context for what those words are, you already know what they are, sounding them out will be easier. And then when we look at story comprehension, that's understanding a story that you read, or in these early years that somebody reads to you or to your child. Hearing many stories and story types will eventually make it easier for your child to read and write stories on their own in the future. Practice makes perfect here. Stories, hearing a variety of stories, is how they will build that story comprehension. Any questions before I move on? No, okay. So the fourth area that we're going to look at is print knowledge, and this is understanding how print works. That letters make words, that letters have a name and a sound. So there's the letter M, and M says mm. In English, we read from left to right, and that you can find print in many places. So in these early years, they start pointing out things like stop sign and McDonald's. Familiar environmental words are the first words that they read. And then the final area is that sound awareness. So that's an awareness that speech can be broken up into smaller units. So there are words, syllables, and individual sounds. Having an understanding of that letter sound knowledge, like I said, M says mm, and that letters represent sounds. So who is your child's first and best teacher? Yeah, you, absolutely. And because you are your child's first and best teacher, I would like to teach you the ways to build your child's vocabulary and language skills, and how to use this interactive system so that you can go home and build language on a daily basis. Reading is more of a conversation or an interaction than it's a passive. This is what I hope that you get out of it. That reading isn't something your child passively just listens to you do. I want you to make this an interactive experience. You're having a conversation with your child while you're reading the book about the pictures and about the things that they see and the things that they're interested in. So how do children learn new words? They hear the word over and over again in context. So that means while you're giving a bath, you say, oh, the water's warm, you're splashing, there's bubbles, oh, don't splash too big, you got water everywhere. In the context of the situation happening is how they learn words. They don't learn words from flashcards or from sitting in front of the television. They might pick up a word or two here, but the best way to build your child's vocabulary is through your interactions with them. Each word that they hear is like a drop in a bucket. So what that means is every time you say the word, if you can just imagine a bucket, it gets filled up. You say the word and the bucket starts to get filled with drops of water, or in this case, drops of words. And when the bucket is full, the last drop, eventually the child will say that word. They have to hear the word multiple times, sometimes hundreds of times before they ever say the word. That's why the first words for kids are usually really common words, words that are in their environment words that they can interact with. They'll say shoe before they say jacket, because shoes are something that they take off by themselves. Anybody who has a toddler knows that shoes can get lost on a walk because they get left somewhere. So the kids will understand the words that they have access to and that they're able to interact with before words that are a little bit more abstract for them. So the more times you say a word, not just randomly, but in the interaction with them, you're building that vocabulary so that eventually they can say the word. We have to understand the word typically before we say it.
Is that why they say no?
Yes, no is a very, so the question was, is that why they say no? No is an extremely powerful word. It's an early developing sound. It holds a lot of power. So your toddler and your little one, that's a...
And they hear it often.
And they hear it often. Yeah, it's actually a word that you say a lot. So it's one of the first words that they say. I didn't use the word no that often. I just used a sound. Philosophically, I don't like how no feels, and so I would say, ah. And my son's father would say, you sound like a dolphin, but it would stop him in his tracks. My son I would say, when he would reach for the electrical cords or the things, and he would stop, and then I'd redirect him. But yeah, absolutely, that's a perfect example of why no is a really common group in the group of first words, for sure. So why is book reading so important? What is it about book reading that we're spending an entire day talking about? Language is very abstract. So I talk about using the words in context as you're experiencing them. But with a book, you can hear the same set of words over and over and over again. It makes language more concrete, and it has that natural repetition built in. They can learn about experiences and places that they've never been to or that they rarely get to go to. You can talk about zoo animals, although that's not a place that most of us go every week or every month. You can talk about the hospital or going on an airplane simply by exposing them to a variety of books. It teaches your child that reading is important by you reading with them and also them seeing you read for pleasure. Reading a magazine, the newspaper, a book of your own teaches them that it's important that we're literate in this family, just simply through your example of reading to them and you reading yourself. And what we know, as I've already said, is that children learn from an interaction. And so we want to make book reading an interactive, fun experience. Little ones are essentially self-centered, and they're built to be that way. Sometimes we get, he's only caring about himself, and well, he's 3, he's supposed to. And so if they're not having fun, they're not going to stay in the interaction with you. If you are trying to drill them to learn a new word or make them sit and read a certain way, you're not going to have a very long interaction. Most kids will leave. It's not like adults who can sit through a boring meeting or a meeting that they have to go to but maybe don't want to go to. We can put on a happy face and pretend that we're enjoying ourselves, but children don't do that. So we want to be that fun, interactive partner. And I'm going to show you a strategy to do that in just a minute. So what we know about language and literacy is before they learn to read and write, they learn to talk and understand the meaning of words. One simple definition of literacy is literacy involves reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So in your early childhood years, before they ever enter kindergarten, the listening and speaking part is really what you are developing through your interactions with them. And children who have good language skills learn to read and write. Like I said, with the vocabulary, the stronger their vocabulary, the easier it is for them to learn to read. Any questions before I move on? Okay. So the strategy that we're going to talk about is CAR, and that stands for comment and wait, ask a question and wait, and respond by adding a little bit more. If your child is bilingual and learning more than one language at a time or multilingual, you're going to repeat their sentence again in the home language. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about how to do that in a minute. This specific strategy can be used through any interaction. I'm going to talk specifically how to use it with book reading today, but during bath time, you want to comment, ask a question, and respond adding a little bit more. That's how we build their language skills. So when we are commenting, we're commenting on what your child is interested in. So it's not what we're interested in or what we think is important, but what are they noticing? On a walk, are they noticing the little butterfly that went past or the oil spill in the water? You're going to stop and make comments on that. And then wait. And anybody have an idea about what the wait is for? Why do we wait?
Give them time to process.
To give them time to process, absolutely. Children do not process as quickly as we do. We need to give them that wait time. And waiting from 5 to 10 seconds, it really depends on your child. Some kids move really fast. If you wait that long, you're going to lose them and their interest level. But knowing your child, I've sometimes counted in my head with some of my students, and at that 9th second, they respond back. They say something. So we're not demanding that they repeat you, but we're creating the opportunity. Even with comments, when I wait expectantly and I say, look, it's a rainbow, if we're looking at the oil spill. And I'm just maintaining eye contact with them, looking at them, then they may respond back if I give them that pause time and either repeat what I say or say their own thing. So it gives them that wait time, but it also lets them know that you're interested in what they're saying. When you give them that pause time, it lets them know that. The second part of the CAR strategy is asking a question and again waiting. We ask questions based on the part of the book or the picture that they're interested in. Again, we're following their lead with their interest. Some kids just want to open to one page in a book, and that's okay. And they only want to talk about that one page. At this stage, that's okay to do. You want to build their interest and follow their lead in what they're interested in, and the more fun and interesting your interaction is with them, the more they're going to love book reading. You want to ask open-ended questions that allow your child to respond with more. This is for your older child who now has language, who can string words together, so 3, 4, 5-year-olds. You want to ask them questions like, why is he eating so much? In the example of the hungry caterpillar. Where is the butterfly? Where did the caterpillar go? And putting in that wait time again, especially with questions, because when we ask a question, we are expecting a response, right? With comments, we don't always expect a response, but with a question, they're supposed to answer. That's the socially acceptable thing to do. So we put that wait time in, and if they don't answer, I give them the answer. So if you say, where did the caterpillar go? And they don't answer, after that 5 or 10 second wait, I'll say, he's in the cocoon. And so I've answered so that they know how to do that later on. Closed questions allow your child to respond with just a point or a gesture, or maybe one word at a time. So examples of those would be, what's this? Do you want this book or that book? And they can point. What's this? That would be a single word response. So really depending on your child's language level. I wouldn't ask a 1-year-old, why is he sleeping? Because that's a higher level question. The easiest questions to answer are yes, no, choice, and simple what and where questions. Even where questions can be answered with a point or gesture. Where did the baby go? And they can point to show you, or point in the picture in this instance. So closed questions are good for your younger kids. And then when your kids get a little bit older and have more language skills, you want to think outside of the simple yes, no, and what questions to more complex questions that get them thinking about why or how, and even things like, I wonder if he's lonely. I wonder. Those out loud musings and thinkings get your child to come up with an answer that is unique to themselves. There isn't a right or wrong to I wonder. But those are the kinds of higher level thinking that we want to promote that you can do when you're reading books. Any questions?
We just had a question from somebody watching at home.
Yes.
On the notion that you were just talking about, she's asking, how can I encourage my 3-year-old to speak in complete sentences versus a few words here and there?
So I'm going to get to that right next when I go to respond, adding a little bit more. We're going to do that next. Any other questions? Okay, so we've talked about the comment and wait, the ask a question and wait, and now we're going to look at responding by adding a little bit more. Children learn through our example. So when we respond adding a little bit more, we repeat what your child said and we add a word or two. So if they say ball, we're going to say big ball, or ball's rolling, or I see the ball. Just a short addition to what they said. So by repeating them, they know I was heard, what I said was important, and then by adding a little bit more, we give them that example of how to use a longer sentence. Does that make sense? So this isn't something that most of us do naturally. Naturally, we all ask a lot of questions from little ones. And what that becomes is an interrogation, and they start to shut down. If anybody has been in a conversation with somebody that just asks question after question after question, after a while you start to like, okay, you're like asking me too many questions. But when we build in the comments, it becomes more of a balanced interaction. By repeating and adding a word, that's typically not something that we do definitely not in our conversations with adults, but it's actually a strategy that therapists use. So what I heard you say was, and they say it back, and then it gets you to add more information to that topic. So with our little ones, we want to add that word and then put in a pause. That expectant pause, looking at them, gives them the opportunity to practice. In speech therapy, I definitely tell the child, you say, and I have them repeat me back. But if you do that all the time at home, do you think it will be a fun and interactive experience and an enjoyable experience for your child to communicate with you? If every time they say something you say it like this.
No.
Do you think they're going to enjoy that?
No.
Probably not. It's okay to do occasionally to say it like this. But what we know about kids is it needs to be a fun, enjoyable interaction. So just by adding that word, it gives them the example of how to add a word to their sentence or their phrases to make them longer over time. Any questions about that? Okay. Viewer at home, did that help a little bit? Okay, good. And then the final part of the strategy for CAR is repeat again in home language if you have more than one language at home. We use this strategy if your child is mixing 2 languages, which is a really common occurrence when children are learning more than one language. By doing this strategy, you're supporting home language. Even if your kids repeat it back in English or they don't repeat it at all, you want to give them that language foundation in the home language. March 24th, I'm doing a training on English language development in our preschool birth to 5-year-old population, so we'll do more of that. If you're interested, we can come back and talk more about that then. But for this strategy, the example that I'm giving is if your child says, yo veo el car, you say it back in Spanish, yo veo el carro, so they get the example of how to say it in their home language. Any questions about that? And again, when I do this, I put in that pause. Some kids will naturally repeat you, or they'll make another comment back, or they'll ask a question, but you want to create that pause time waiting for them. And I do that expectant waiting. I'm keeping eye contact with them. I'm looking, I'm waiting, not turning around and doing something new. By using this strategy, you're building your child's vocabulary and language skills in the home language, laying that strong foundation. So a strong language foundation in any language makes it easier to learn English. If you're not laying a strong foundation, it makes it more difficult later on when they get to school and they're learning English. So let's look specifically at how we can use this strategy during book reading. So as I've said, interaction needs to be fun and playful. I want you to have fun while you're reading the book. Use the mama bear voice or the baby voice. Make fun sounds and words. Make this an enjoyable experience. Let your child choose the book. If they choose the book, then they're more likely to stay in the interaction with the book because it's something they're interested in. Does anybody have a child who wants to read the same book over and over and over again? And I see Mom's face went, because this is a book that she no longer wants to read. She's so bored of it. And I'm going to encourage you just to continue. There's a reason that repetitiveness eventually helps them learn the vocabulary and the language skills. And over time, they can read the book themselves. When my son was about 3 years old, he read the book, Are You My Mother?, to his preschool class from memory, because we had read that book over and over and over again. He just memorized the words. So that's a really strong, if they're showing a real strong interest in that book, you want to encourage that. Keep reading that same book. Eventually they'll choose a new book, but until they do, just keep reading it with fun and interest and excitement. Let your child choose how long to look at each page or even each book. I have an example of a very loved book. When my son was, by the way, if you ever meet him, don't tell him I talk about him so much in trainings. He would be mortified. He's 14, like I said. So he would go through this book like super fast. And that's the kind of kid that he is. He's a super fast kid. He doesn't need that 10-second wait. He's off and doing his own thing. So it has been loved so much that it has fallen apart, and I can't even tape it back together, but it's been taped multiple times. So if they want to read through really fast and you just quickly label the pictures in the book, that's okay. He had fun, and then he's off and doing his same. This book took us like 7 seconds to read, and it was considered a successful book reading experience. He was about 18 months when we read that book. And he knew names of trucks. I don't think he even knows them to this day, but at 2, he could tell me what a giant excavator was and what a front loader is and a backhoe. That's building vocabulary, so that when he got to school, he's ready to learn to read those words, really read those words, because he's been exposed to them. And so don't worry if your child isn't reading the book the right way, right? They maybe want to go to that one page in their favorite book, the page that, because they love it so much and you've read it so many times, you go to that page and, oh, it really gets loud when my head goes down. And they just want to go to this page in The Hungry Caterpillar. And I brought The Hungry Caterpillar because it's one of my favorite books. But maybe they love this page because when you get to the ice cream cone, you go, and your baby goes back. Even before they have words, they can pretend to lick, or you can pretend to be the caterpillar with your finger, making this interaction fun and interesting and playful. Book reading should be playful. So it's okay if they just want to go to that one page, or they only want to look at a couple pages in the book and then they're done. If we force them to sit, they're not going to enjoy it over time. And before, Yoli, can I use the example? So before the session got started, we were talking about Yoli's kids and how one of them was not interested in writing at all and didn't want to do letters. And the teacher kept saying, that's okay, just keep exposing her and it will come, and just wait. And all of a sudden, magically, now her daughter wants to write hearts and write her name and do all kinds of things. The same thing happens with books. If we're pushing that they have to sit through the whole book, or they have to read this book, it is not going to be fun, and they're not going to want to sit with you. But if you make this a fun and interactive experience for them, their periods of sitting will become longer and longer over time. I had the same exact experience with my son. It wasn't until right before he started kindergarten that he was ready to start writing his name. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm an educator. He has no interest in a pencil. He won't pick up a crayon. He won't. And then all of a sudden it just clicked, and off he was going, writing, and he did just fine when he got to kindergarten. There's a question?
A question from Emily Miller asking, saying, most nights my 2-year-old wants to read a book by memory. It's really cute, but my 4-year-old really just wants me to read the book that we selected. So I need to give attention to one over the other because my 4-year-old gets annoyed waiting for the 2-year-old to get through each page. What do you suggest as a compromise? I want to encourage my 2-year-old to read, but I also want to allow my son to be read by me. suggestions?
What a great question. Oh, having multiple children. Not my experience. I just had one, so he got to get just about anything he wanted whenever he wanted it. And that's not necessarily true, but it is challenging when you have more than one child. So does anybody have an example of how they manage this at home for those of you with more than one kiddo, child? Yeah.
I have it might make a difference because I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. So the 6-year-old has a little more patience.
Mm-hmm.
But I just let her know, if I tell her ahead of time, we'll get to your book if you let us go through my
Right.
sister's book first. And so I just promise her that we'll read her book.
And that's a great parenting strategy in general. First this, then that. I use it for all kinds of things. I still use it. First homework, then video games. First your chores, then you can go skateboarding. And at this young age, in that exact instance, Emily, I would do that. First your sister's going to read the book, or first the 2-year-old's going to read the book, and then we'll read the book that the 4-year-old chooses. So everybody gets their needs met, and laying that out in advance. First this, then that can sometimes help smooth the discomfort or but it's my turn kind of thing. That magical first this, then that, and having both books there. First, we're going to do this one, and then we're going to do that, so they can see both. Any other questions? Okay. And then I've already mentioned when it comes to the asking questions, you really want to think about your child's language level, what they understand and what they can use now. When you are asking a question, you want to make sure that you're asking a question that they're able to answer. And after that wait time, if they don't answer, you want to provide the answer for them. That's how you model how to answer questions. You say, oh, where's the caterpillar? And you wait those 10 seconds and there's no response, and I would say, there he is in the cocoon. So I'm gesturing to show them they can answer by a gesture, and I'm also giving the language to where the answer to where the caterpillar went. Continuing on for using the CAR strategy during book reading, you want to allow, and I said this, your child to choose that same book over and over again, even when you don't want to read it again. Get your child involved in the interaction, so have them turn the pages in the book. Set aside a book reading time every day. Some of us choose to do that before bedtime, but if that's not what works for your family, that's okay. Choose another time. But letting your child know that book reading is important by setting aside the time to do it. And like I said, when my son was reading this book, it was a 60-second interaction. It did not take long at all. How about everybody at home? Do you have a specific time that you read with your child? Is it bedtime? Thumbs up if you usually read around bedtime. Yeah.
Sometimes when they get out from here, from school.
Sometimes.
Go home and they're ready to read.
Yeah. So after school can be a good time because they've been at school all day. Things, they need to sort of reconnect with you. You can sit down with them. You can help them settle their bodies, transition from school to home, and book reading time can be a good time to do that. Yes.
Sandy at home is saying, my son loves books, but at bedtime he won't sleep until we have read at least 3 to 4. So, and then nap time and bedtime, and then after nap sometimes are from the audience at home.
Yeah, I read before I go to bed. I read every night before I go to bed. It is how I calm my body down, how I get myself centered, and just sort of disconnect from the day and get my body ready for bed. That's a great example to give to your child. And you can, when my son was in his crib, he wasn't much of a sleeper. It took him a long time to fall asleep, still to this day. And I would put books in his crib. Toys were not allowed, but you're allowed to read. So even at 9 months old, what he ended up doing was throwing them out of the crib most of the time. But even at 9 months old, I was setting the example. And of course, I'm going to give him those really sturdy board books at that age, or the waterproof books that they can chew on. It's more of a toy than it is an actual book, or they can take it in the bath. Those kinds of books, setting the example that before bed, this is how we calm our body down. and then making it part of the routine. Another great idea is having books in a basket that they can choose, that it's in their play area. So you've got a basket of toys that they can play with whenever they want, and you have books that they can play with whenever they want. You want them to have the option to choose those books all on their own, and just look at the pictures by themselves, or take the book and bring it over to you if that's what they choose to do. You can change the words in the book so that some books are really wordy, but your child likes the pictures. So one of my favorite books was, I'm gonna say I Love You Forever, but that's a great book too, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. Runaway Bunny. I loved this book, Runaway Bunny. Every other picture is black and white and the other one is color, and it's about this little bunny who's running away from his mom, and the mom says, if you become a tulip, I'll become a gardener, and I will feed and water you in the garden, or something along those lines. It was way too many words for my son. So I would say, baby bunny's a flower, and then we turn the page, mama's a gardener, baby bunny's a cloud, mommy's the sun, or, we made it a simple, easy way to read the book because he enjoyed the pictures, but there were too many words for him at that stage. If you are speaking a language other than English, but you don't have access to a whole lot of books in your home language, you can describe the pictures or talk about the pictures in your home language. That's a great way of supporting home language as well. Is there another question? Okay. So I'm going to go through those 5 areas that we talked about in the beginning. When we're looking at supporting language and vocabulary development, or the conversation skills, that commenting and back and forth, ask a question and wait, we're building the conversation skills there. Every time we read a book, they're learning new vocabulary words as we're reading it. When you comment on the pictures, you're teaching a child what that word means, and you're building their both receptive, their understanding of the word, and their expressive language when they're ready to make their own comment or ask a question about it. When you respond adding a little bit more, you're building on their language skills by showing them this is how you put a sentence together, simply by your example based on their interest level. When we look at supporting story comprehension, you want to read the same book over and over again. That helps them understand the book. It helps them to answer questions about it over time because they're familiar with it. You want to expose your child to different types of books. So first I said read the same book over and over if they want to, but also make sure that you have other kinds of books available. So books that are about factual things, going to the doctor, a day at the zoo, or things that are about the ocean, or various experiences. Tell stories from your childhood. Oral stories make them think of pictures in their head, and when we're learning how to read, that's what you have to do in order to have reading comprehension. You read, and you've got to make pictures in your own head. So telling oral stories, they can be short stories. My son loved to hear stories about when I was a child. Or tell stories about when they were a baby. Your child can be 2 years old, and you can say, when you were a baby, and make it a short story with 3 or 4 events. One day we went to visit Grandma. You cried the whole way there because you didn't want to be in the car. When we got there, you were happy. Keeping it simple so they have to make pictures in their minds. And then have your child retell those familiar stories. Ask them to tell you the story. Tell me about what we did at the park today. That's essentially a story. Retelling an event is retelling a story of what just happened. Any questions about that? Okay, so when we move on to looking at how do we support print knowledge, that's another area that we talked about for early literacy skills, those skills that you can build from birth on before they even get to kindergarten. You want to read the title of and the author. So you can say, let me get out a book that has a title and the author. Oh, this is the example I wanted to use. So you can point to the word. You don't have to point every single time, but point to the title and you can say Corduroy by Don Freeman. Or you can use the words. The title of this book, now I wouldn't do that with your 2-year-old because it's too high of a skill for them to understand. But for your 4, 5, almost 6-year-old, I would use those words author and illustrator. In this one, it's the same author and illustrator, but for other books, it can be different. And then I would define what that means. Oh, author means it's the person who wrote the book. Illustrator drew the pictures. Let's look at the pictures. And you can point out the difference between these are the pictures and these are the words. And every once in a while, when you're reading a book, you can point to the words. So as you're reading, you need to understand that the pictures and the print are different. And so just by you pointing it out and following along, their eyes will follow your finger and they'll learn that left-right sweep, which is not how our eyes usually move. But by you pointing to the words, they understand that we read from here to here, and then we go back to here and we go here. You don't have to even mention that you're doing it. Just occasionally point to the words. You want to point out environmental print in the environment. We talked about stop signs or the McDonald's sign, common things that they see in their environment, and then they can start to spell out the word. Oh, Mom, S-T-O-P, that says stop. Yep, that says stop. And really they're understanding that they're not really reading the words per se, they're memorizing what this thing looks like and then reading it. So you can be silly, especially with your older kids, and start reading like this. Okay, let's start reading. No, you're holding it wrong, because we want them to have what's called book orientation, that we hold a book this way, so this is the back of the book, this is the front of the book. That's not something I would do every single time I read, because before you even get into a word, you've lost your child. But every once in a while I'll say, okay, let's look at the front of the book. Oh, look what Corduroy's doing. I was at the library with my son when he was about 3, and this was one of his favorite books. One of those books that he wanted every single night. And it's quite a lengthy book. It's not just a word or two each page. So we were at the library, and I thought, well, let's get more books by the author of Corduroy. But I couldn't remember who wrote the book. So I asked him. I said, Seti. Oh, I said his name. He's going to be so mad if he sees the video. I said, honey, who wrote Corduroy? Corduroy by, he goes, Don Freeman, Mommy. And I was like, oh yeah. So we went to the library to see if he had any other books that were available. So he, because I had done it enough, remembered who the author was in that. And that's a school readiness skill that in order to pass their reading benchmarks when they get to kindergarten and first grade, it's something that they need to know how to do. So again, most importantly, I would point to the words occasionally. And then as they get a little bit older, using the words author, illustrator, and pointing out the title and the front and the back of the book. You can point out environmental print in the grocery store. Let's make a list. Help Mommy find the red apples. Okay, let's cross it off the list. Just by having a list and having your child interact with that list, it helps them to realize that print means something. Those scribbles on a paper mean something. You can point out things in the bath, like, oh, shampoo, or, oh, look, the H means hot. Just in pointing out where letters and words are in their environment. You can do the same thing at breakfast time by pointing out the title of the cereal box that's there. Often cereal will be some of the first words that they read, Cheerios, and you can point to those words. And so a couple more strategies to support reading readiness. You can pause a familiar story, especially if it's a repetitive text story. So that means it's a story that says the same thing over and over again. Brown bear, what do you see? I see a red bird looking at me. Red bird, what do you see? And your child will do the same thing. Now you've got this book reading being interactive. I see a yellow duck looking at, and then as their language gets better at combining words, and you learned last time at about 2 is when they start to combine 2 words, 3, they have 3-word sentences. You can pause and say, brown bear, what do you see? Yeah, and then they can put the 2 words, what do you see? And then you can say, and they'll fill in because it's such a repetitive book. Of course, you're not going to do that the first time you read the book, But if you've read this book multiple times, they can start filling in the words. Or even when you turn the page, they can tell you what animal it is, or what color and what animal it is. You can make books at home. So my family is all back east, and hey Mom, if you're watching, I gave my mom the YouTube link. She's 89 and she's in Florida, and she said, of course I'm gonna watch my baby if she's on YouTube. So I hope that the link worked. 89, you know, technology's not always the strongest suit for my mom, but I give her a thumbs up for trying. So you can make homemade books. Like I said, my family's all back east. I made books with all of my family members so he knew who they were when we came to visit. They weren't strangers. You can make a book with, you know, digital phones or digital cameras or your phone right now. It's so easy to print out a couple of pictures and just slide them into a 99-cent photo album that you can get at the 99-cent store, and make it a book about their first birthday or a special trip that you went to or visiting grandma, and then tell a story about it. You can attend stories at the local library. All of the branches have preschool story time. Very often they'll have the librarian read a story, and there'll be toys there to play, and it's an interactive experience. And get your child a library book. Let them get a book out or two that they choose on a monthly basis. Make that part of your family's daily or, you know, regular outing time. Not daily, might be a bit much. And then they understand that this is my library card. My son has his own library card that he got at like 2 years old. I don't think there's a minimum age to get a library card. And then you just want to make sure that you bring those library books back. And then let them choose. Let them choose about what their interests are, what book, you know, catches their interest. Again, tell those oral stories. It makes them imagine in their mind and create pictures in their mind. Anybody have any ideas for a book that they might make at home with your own camera and 99-cent store photo album?
I might do some pictures from when he was younger.
Some pictures.
We actually did that here, and they are reading that story time here.
Uh-huh.
So they just go ahead.
Thank you. It's okay, they can't see you. They can only hear you.
I might go ahead and reinvent that at home, but then add some more pictures of when me and Daddy met, and you know, around the time we had him, and you know, pictures of his cousins that he played with, so that he can remember, you know, the dates and times, and you know, how much fun that was for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great suggestions. Yes. Can you pass? Thank you.
I know my older daughter likes it when I make up stories that have her as a protagonist. So maybe I could actually make a physical book out of one of those.
Yeah, I used to tell stories of the little boy bunny. Oh, and the little boy bunny did not want to get dressed, and he would scream and yell, and so it was close enough to a story about what we were going through at home, with the outcome that I wanted to see happen. But it was a way that we could work through that struggle without it being all about him and me telling him what to do. So in that example, the dad said he's using those oral stories. You can turn those into, you know, picture books. My son was, we traveled a lot because my family lives back east, and when he was young, my dad was ill, and we were traveling a lot. And he was terrified of the security, because we had to put his favorite blanket in the security, and he had to, like, was going away from him, and it was terrifying. So I told the story over and over and over again. We're going to go to the airport, and we're going to get our papers, and then we're going to go to the security line, and we're going to wait, and waiting is so hard. And then we're going to put Blanky on the special belt, and Blanky's going to get a picture, and then we're going to go through and pick Blanky up. And because that story was told multiple times, he didn't cry the next time we went to the airport and had to say goodbye to Blanky. So you can front load information like a trip to the doctor that might be scary with, we're going to go, you're going to get a shot of medicine that's going to help you to stay healthy. It's going to hurt for just a second, but then it will be all gone and it won't hurt anymore. And when we're done, we're going to go get maybe a treat or maybe the library. You decide. But by setting it up in advance, it can help to ease anxieties and fears. You can tell stories about things that already happened, so you're retelling events. There's really no limit to about how you can tell books, how you can, you know, use books in that way. Books belong everywhere. Books should be in your bag, in your car, when you're on the bus. These are ways that you can incorporate literacy throughout the day. My son would, anytime we were in the car, he wanted to have toys. Books were part of those toys so that he could maintain, himself in the car on any kind of car ride. Waiting in line, most of us don't go to the bank like we used to, but waiting in line for those kinds of things. You can tell oral stories. You can have a little book. This was a little one that I carried everywhere because it was little. It could literally fit in my pocket, and it was a story all about dogs. And it had a variety of different kinds of pictures and paintings, which is a progression from the first thing children can do is identify a photograph, so an actual photograph of a dog, then to a drawing of a dog that looks more realistic, and then to something more abstract of a dog, and then eventually reading the word D-O-G is dog. There's a progression to moving from very concrete, the actual photograph, to more abstract, which are those letters. Any questions or comments?
We have a couple of questions and comments from our audience
Yes.
at home. Emily Miller wanted to add that she also will make picture books of events that happen in their lives all of the time. So like the time we went to the park and saw the swans. She has a portable tiny Polaroid printer that she has that connects to
Wow.
her phone so she can print those out. And she does it almost every week, she said.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. We did have a couple of questions earlier about books. Do you have recommendations for kinder books? What would be
There's
any
a
titles?
kindergarten list that you can get from the library, and Long Beach Unified has one on their website asking your child's actual kindergarten teacher what books. And then again, those lists, ask the librarian, because there's a pamphlet that the library has for each grade. But what I would really suggest is primarily what's your child interested in, following your child's lead with that. By kindergarten or going into kindergarten, they can read books that are a lot lengthier, these repetitive kinds of books. This is called The Napping House. I kind of brought some of my most favorite books, the ones that I read with my son. So The Goodnight Moon and the Napping House, The Brown Bear, all the Dr. Seuss books with all that rhyme and alliteration. So rhyming are words that sound the same. Alliteration is words that start with the same sound. My mommy made muffins. That's alliteration. Learning how to rhyme helps you to learn to read. So kids don't always, you have to be exposed to rhyme in order to know how to rhyme. And so you want to make silly stories up that rhyme. Read books that have the rhyming books. All those Dr. Seuss books, and it's Read Across America Week right now, they all have silly made-up words, but they include all that rhyming and sometimes alliteration. That's a great school readiness for your kindergarten age kids.
And then we had a couple of questions about books for kids with speech impairments or stuttering. Do you have any specific books that you would recommend for kids with speech challenges?
There is a book called Wadney Wabbit, and it's about a rabbit who can't say his R's. And so just having a conversation about how everybody speaks differently. I don't know of a specific book about stuttering, but the Wadney Wabbit talks about how we all speak differently, and it actually, I think in that book he gets teased, and then there's an outcome, where we learn about how everybody's different and everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses and different ways of communicating. So that would be an example of something you could do to talk about that. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to skip that part, and I'm going to go to the resources. So for those of you who have children in school from preschool through 3rd grade, have you heard of Ready Rosie? Are you on Ready Rosie?
Yeah, it's a requirement.
It's a requirement. I love that. So your Head Start, your CDCs, the kids who are at Buffum TLC, you should all have access to Ready Rosie. If you don't, speak to your child's teacher about it. I know in the early childhood programs, they're really pushing for it. It's not something that's available unless you're connected to the school district. I know that it's available for up to 3rd grade, but I don't know how consistently your K1, 2, 3 teachers are using it. It's a really wonderful resource with 2-minute videos that talk about everything. Teaching colors, reading books, learning language, emotional difficulties at home. And they're just literally 2 minutes with videos of parents and their children working through whatever the topic is. I watch them all the time because I think that they're fantastic. So if you don't have access to it and you are in one of the district's preschool programs, speak to your teacher about it. Readingrockets.org is, I use this for the resources for this as well, for writing the presentation, but Reading Rockets has a whole bunch of information about early literacy skills and getting your child ready for kindergarten, and so that's a really wonderful resource to look into. Hannon.org is an organization out of Canada, and they have parent training programs, but their website also has, for free, you don't have to have taken their programs, it has a parent drop-down button, and it tells you how to use bubbles and be interactive, how to read a book, how to ask questions, all kinds of things. If your child has autism, it has an area for parents with kids with autism. There's just a wealth of information there. And they really follow along with the strategies that I've been talking today about interaction should be fun. Language learning is about an interaction between you and your child. And then I also included the...
I'm sorry, one of the things they stress is being in front of the child also.
Yes.
Next to you.
Yeah, when you read a book, children learn by watching our mouth. And most of the time, depending on your child, your child's down here and you're way up here. Most kids don't look all the way up to really watch what you're doing to form sounds. And so Hannon really talks about getting face-to-face with the interaction. That means you either bend down, you lift your child up, you get down at their level, they're in a chair or a high chair. And then with book reading, so many of us have our child with their back to us, but then we can't see what they're interested in because their back is to us. So what part of the book are they looking at? What little part, I didn't know. Did you all know? It took me years. Goodnight Moon has a mouse that hides all over the book. Okay, so most people know this. It took me years. I think my son pointed it out one day, look, he hides all over the book. I didn't know that he was interested in the mouse until I followed his lead and looked at what he was looking at, right? So if you sit them slightly to the side or even face to face, they're across from you, you can see what part of the book they're interested in. Thank you for pointing that out. And then the 0-3.org is fantastic resources based on age. You can just put in your child's age and it gives you a one-sheet back to front of all areas: social, emotional, cognitive, language, physical development, and what they should be doing at each stage. So you have an idea, is your child developing as appropriate? And then these are the references that I used to write the actual presentation. The Hannon Early Learning Programs. Washington Learning Systems is actually who created the CAR system: comment, ask a question, respond, adding a little bit more. And their website has disappeared. It used to be walearning.org, I think, and I looked all over the internet. It takes you to some gambling site. So unfortunately, it's disappeared, but in your handout, I've given you from Washington Learning Systems. It's in both English and Spanish. Yours is a two-sided handout that is a reminder for how to use this simple strategy. And again, we talked about how to use it in book reading, but you can use it during play as well. Next class, we're going to talk about language and play, which is on the 10th. Tuesday, we're going to do the third series. And we're actually going to look at this strategy and then how to use it in play. So you have that there for your reference. And unfortunately, I can't find their website anywhere. And then the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association is the governing body for speech-language pathologists in the United States. And I took some of their birth to 3 information and their early literacy skills to create this PowerPoint. So before we leave, I wanted to get you thinking about, how am I going to use this at home? When will you do this at home, and how will you remember to use this strategy? So we all learn lots of wonderful information. But for me, until I make it intentional, the true learning doesn't happen. The true use of whatever I've learned doesn't happen. So when do you think you might use this strategy at home? all the time. That's a really great goal. That's going to be hard to maintain. I would be nice to yourself and say, I'm going to do this for 10 minutes at book reading before nap, or I'm going to do this while we're in the grocery store. This car strategy, like we talked about, can be used in any situation, and then build on it from there. Because this really is something. The reading is, you can use the car strategy during reading, but you can also use the car strategy during play, during outings, walking to the park, going to school. It can be used at all times. So I love the idea that you want to use it at all times, because it can be. But start small. Set yourself I'm going to do it during book reading time only, to get used to this if it's new for you, right? Build. So it's a strategy that you're successful with, and then from there, once it becomes routine, say, okay, now I'm going to do it when we're driving in the car, or now I'm going to do it when we're on our walks to the park. So that you just build and build using this car strategy, so that over time, eventually you are using it all the time. And so how are you going to remember to use this strategy?
Put it in the calendar.
Oh, put it in a calendar.
My calendar is color-coded on my phone, so like her stuff is pink.
Okay, so you're going to put a pink reminder.
For the time.
Awesome. That's a wonderful, I love the idea that we can use our technology to help us remember everything. So putting an alarm in, remember to use the car strategy around the time that maybe you're book reading or you go for a walk. Great. How else are you going to remember to do it? Anybody have any other ideas? Yeah, I love that idea. I have reminders in my car, reminders in my phone all the time. You can use this and put it by your book reading area. You can put it on your refrigerator, hang it up somewhere where it's visual. It's a reminder of how I'm going to remember. It's a visual reminder. That's another way to do it. And so just to end on this, I'm going to read a few quotes that I thought were really important about reading. And Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. Right? That's how our mind expands. That's how we grow. That's how we challenge ourselves. That's how we step out of the situation we're in, by learning how to read. Once you can read, nobody can hold you back. And then Marilyn Yeager Adams is a specialist in cognition and education, and she's a scholar at Brown University. And she says, reading aloud with children is known to be the single most important activity for building the knowledge and skills they will eventually require for learning to read. So what you're doing, like I said in the beginning, you are your child's first and best teacher. You have the most influence over them. And anytime you can take a strategy or a new way of doing things and expand on your child's language, expand on their vocabulary, their conversation skills, their early literacy skills, you're just preparing them for kindergarten and beyond. So give yourselves a hand for being here. Pat yourself on the back and say, you did a good job, because you took time out of your day. Those of you who are watching on YouTube Live also, or who've come back and watched it on the archives, this is an important thing that you're doing for your child, and I commend you for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.